Okay, so let's unpack this. Imagine you're standing in a room, right, face to face with something, an object that's supposed to be incredibly valuable,
Hmm.
and all the experts, the scientists, even the lawyers, they've all signed off months of research, tests,
Yeah.
everything checks out, but something inside you just feels off.
Yeah, it's that immediate hit, that like gut feeling. It
Yeah.
just sort of bypasses all the thinking, all the conscious stuff.
Right.
Maybe it's even a physical thing, or just a word pops into your head that feels totally wrong, like thinking fresh when you're looking at something that's supposedly 2,000 years old.
That intense reaction, that's exactly the story of the Getty Museum and this ancient Greek statue, a Koros.
Ah, the Koros, yeah.
They were ready to shell out a fortune, all the data looked good, the scientific tests said authentic, but then some experts saw it, and they just had this immediate, visceral
Like an
feeling.
intuitive repulsion.
Exactly, thinking it didn't look right the absolute second they saw it.
And that instantaneous blink, that super fast unconscious judgment. It turned out to be completely right on the money.
Yeah.
The statue was this brilliant fake, modern. They'd artificially aged the surface, even faked the paperwork with things like, postal codes that didn't even exist back then. Obvious errors if you knew what to look for.
So what does this actually tell us? It's a perfect way to kick off this deep dive,
Yeah.
really. We're exploring that incredible power, but also, the serious dangers sometimes of thinking without thinking.
Right.
We've pulled together a whole bunch of sources, articles, research, notes to try and get a handle on how these rapid judgments actually work.
And we're going to pull out the key stuff, the nuggets, to
Yeah.
really understand, okay, when can you trust that gut feeling? And just as important, when is it likely to lead you totally astray?
Yeah.
We'll look at some pretty surprising examples, too, from all over the place.
Mhm.
Relationships, medicine,
War games, marketing.
even police work, yeah. It's kind of a shortcut to getting informed about this really fascinating bit of psychology.
Okay, let's dive in then.
So the core idea we're starting with, it's called thin slicing.
And slicing.
Yeah. It's basically our brain's amazing ability to find patterns, make judgments from these really, really narrow slices of experience.
Okay.
You get just a tiny bit of information, but your mind just, whoosh, extrapolates the whole picture somehow.
It's like seeing just a couple of brushstrokes and somehow knowing, okay, that's a Rembrandt.
Yeah.
Where do we see this really clearly in the research?
Well, one of the most famous examples is John Gottman's Love Lab research.
Ah, yeah, Gottman.
He studies couples, right?
Yeah.
And he's found he can watch them interact for just a few minutes,
Just a few minutes. Wow.
sometimes as little as 3 minutes,
3 minutes, seriously.
and predict with really high accuracy whether they're going to get divorced years later.
That's unbelievable. What's he looking for in that tiny slice of time? Is it just like, are they fighting or not?
Not exactly. He uses this coding system, SPAS it's called, to analyze their interactions.
Oh,
But the key thing isn't just, overall positivity or negativity.
okay.
He's looking for really subtle emotional cues. And the big one, the major predictor, seems to be contempt.
Contempt. Huh. Why that one?
Yeah.
What makes contempt stand out so much compared to, say, anger or sadness?
Well, Gottman says contempt, unlike anger maybe, it implies this feeling of superiority, like
Oh.
disdain for your partner.
Ah, okay.
It just eats away at the basic respect in the relationship. It's like a dismissal, not just a disagreement.
That makes sense.
And this kind of subtle reading of interaction, it shows up in other places too, right? Like those
Yeah.
medical malpractice lawsuits.
That's right. Our sources point out that, surprisingly, doctors get sued less based on their actual, technical skill
Yeah.
and more on how patients felt they were treated.
Exactly. Did the doctor actually listen? Did they seem rushed? Was their bedside manner any good?
Hmm.
There's that quote from a lawyer, something like, people just don't sue doctors they like.
Right.
It really shows how, in those quick, high-stakes moments, our judgment of the relationship or just the feeling of being cared for matters hugely, sometimes even more than the objective skill involved.
That tracks. And you see this kind of rapid expert insight in other fields, too, like the military's coup d'etat.
Yes, exactly. The power of the glance, like those brilliant generals who can supposedly just scan a battlefield and instantly grasp the whole situation.
Oh, wow.
Or bird watchers using GIS.
GIS.
Yeah, GISS. It's like identifying a bird from way off just by its overall shape, how it flies, its sort of essence.
Without needing to see the exact feather color or anything.
Right. It's trained thin slicing. They've learned to see the pattern instantly.
What's so fascinating, though, is that these snap judgments, they often happen, like, totally outside our conscious awareness.
Yep.
The experts looking at that Getty Koros, they felt something was wrong, that mental rush, a flurry of visual facts, but they couldn't immediately say why.
Yeah, it was like it happened behind a locked door.
Exactly.
Remember that Iowa gambling
Oh,
experiment?
yeah, the card decks?
Right. People started unconsciously avoiding the bad decks. Their bodies even showed stress, like sweaty palms, before they could consciously tell you which decks were risky and why.
So their unconscious mind was way ahead of the game.
Absolutely. It had figured it out first.
It's like you've got this background processor deciding stuff while your conscious mind is still booting up.
And that unconscious processing is, well, it's incredibly useful most of the time. It acts like a kind of mental valet, you know.
Mental valet, I like that.
Yeah, it handles countless little details, automatic behaviors in the background, like that experiment where people walked slower after reading words about being old.
Mm-hmm.
Their unconscious just adjusted their walking speed. They didn't even realize it. And that frees up your conscious brain to focus on other things.
But, and here's the big but, right? Our blink, our intuition, it's not perfect. It has a definite dark side. It can lead us way off track into what the source calls the Warren Harding error.
Ah, yes. Being completely fooled by how things look on the surface.
Right.
The classic story is Harry Darty picking Warren Harding as a presidential candidate pretty much just because he looked the part, you know, tall, dark, and handsome,
Yeah.
presidential.
And Harding turned out to be, well,
Famously ineffective. One of the worst presidents by most accounts. He had the look, totally, but none of the actual substance needed for the job.
and we all carry these kinds of unconscious associations, don't we? Things
Mhm.
that can sway our judgments without us even realizing it. Those implicit association tests, the IATs, they really show this.
Yeah, they measure how fast you link paired concepts.
Huh?
And they show how quickly people associate things like, say, gender with career or family or race with good or bad concepts.
And the really striking thing is,
Yeah.
your unconscious associations can actually contradict what you consciously believe, your stated values.
Absolutely. The source mentions that in one study, even half of the black test takers showed stronger associations between white and good,
Wow.
which researchers think comes down to just pervasive cultural messages, stuff you absorb without even thinking about it. It shows how deep these biases can run, way below the surface.
It's a really powerful example of that Warren Harding error playing out in just how we perceive people. That height bias study is another one.
Oh, right. Taller people earning significantly more.
Yeah. We unconsciously connect physical stature, which is totally superficial, right?
Right.
With things like leadership ability or competence. It's crazy.
And this unconscious bias isn't just some abstract idea. It has real effects. Think about that car salesman study by Ian Ayres.
Where they sent testers into dealerships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Testers who were identical in every way except their race and gender. And the study found that black buyers and female buyers were systematically offered higher prices.
Ooh.
That's the Warren Harding error, leading directly to discrimination. Thin slicing based on stereotypes, not on the actual person in front of you.
And you contrast that with someone like Bob Galloom, that successful car salesman mentioned.
Yeah.
His whole strategy to success seems to come from deliberately not making those snap judgments based on how someone looks or what car they drive up in.
Right. He treats everyone exactly the same. He knows you just can't tell who's actually going to buy a car based on appearances. The person who looks least likely might walk out with the most expensive model.
So this brings us back to that idea of the locked door and something else the source calls the storytelling problem.
Ah, yeah. Because our intuitive decisions happen unconsciously behind that locked door, we often genuinely don't know why we made them.
Right.
But if someone asks us to explain, well, we're pretty good at inventing reasons, plausible-sounding stories that might have nothing to do with what actually drove the decision.
Like in that Mayer two-rope experiment, where people solved the puzzle but gave completely wrong explanations for how they did it.
Exactly. Or that O.J. Simpson juror mentioned, who couldn't really admit, maybe even to herself, that race might have played an unconscious role in her judgment. Sometimes we just have to accept that we don't actually know the real why behind our feelings or choices.
It makes me think of that speed dating research.
Oh, yeah.
People go in saying, okay, I want someone smart and kind and sincere. But then in the actual speed dating moment, they find themselves drawn to someone totally different, maybe funny or just physically attractive.
Right. Their actions reveal preferences that were hidden behind that locked door. Preferences they weren't consciously aware of or couldn't articulate beforehand.
It's also why, like, top athletes, say a pro tennis player,
Uh-huh.
they can have this incredible intuitive skill honed over thousands of hours, but they often really struggle to explain exactly how they do it, the precise mechanics.
Yeah, the skill is just embedded in their feel, their intuition. It's not something they consciously think through step by step, so it's hard to put into words.
Okay, so if our blink is this amazing tool, capable of brilliant insights, but it's also really vulnerable to mistakes, bias, getting misled, how do we actually make it better?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it?
The source material points towards things like context, structure, and even this idea of frugality.
A really great example here is that Millennium Challenge war game.
Oh, the military exercise, right. Blue team versus red team.
Exactly. The U.S. military's blue team had absolutely everything. All the data, cutting-edge tech, super detailed plans.
It's like they should have crushed it.
You'd think. But they were actually overwhelmed, paralyzed by the sheer volume of information and their own rigid analytical process.
And the red team, led by Paul Van Riper.
He did the complete opposite. Minimal tech, relied heavily on intuition, used totally unconventional tactics like motorcycle couriers instead of radios, turning off ship lights like in World War II, using swarms of small boats. He acted fast, based on quick insights, and basically wiped the floor with the blue team. Sank a huge chunk of their simulated fleet before they even knew what hit them.
So how did he manage that?
Van Riper succeeded because he created what the source calls structure for spontaneity. He deliberately set up an environment where rapid, intuitive decisions were possible and effective.
Okay.
And this connects to Gary Klein's research on experts, like firefighters, making decisions under intense pressure.
Right. They don't sit there comparing options.
No, they quickly recognize patterns, like subtle signs that a fire is about to flash over, or that a floor might collapse, and they just act, trying to overanalyze in those fast-moving, high-stakes situations. That can get you killed.
The idea of frugality you mentioned seems really relevant here, too. That Cook County Hospital heart attack algorithm, Goldman's rule.
Yeah, great case study. This really simple algorithm, using only a few key factors, ECG results, answers to a couple of specific questions. It turned out to be significantly better and safer at diagnosing heart attacks than the complex judgments of experienced doctors.
But the doctors resisted it, right?
Oh yeah, big time. It just didn't feel right to them to ignore all the other information they had about a patient. Their history, other symptoms, all that stuff.
But the simple rule worked better.
It did because it focused only on the factors that were truly predictive. It wasn't confused by all the other potentially irrelevant noise. It shows that more information isn't always better. Sometimes being frugal, using fewer, but the right pieces of information is the key.
And market research often gets this wrong, doesn't it? Especially with new stuff.
Totally. Those traditional methods like asking people detailed questions in a survey or doing quick sip tests, they often fall flat when you're introducing something genuinely unfamiliar.
Why is that?
Because people just can't easily articulate their reaction to something they have no experience with, no frame of reference for.
Like Kenna's music, the musician example.
Exactly. Industry insiders, the experts, they heard him and their trained blink recognize the talent instantly. But market research subjects just hearing a snippet over a phone line, they didn't get it.
Or the Aaron chair. People initially hated it, called it the chair of death.
Right. Because it looked so different, yet it became this huge design icon. Or even New Coke. The initial taste tests were positive in isolation, but people couldn't process how different it was from the idea and feeling of original Coke.
And context is just critical here, isn't it? That whole sensation transference idea.
Yes, Louis Cheskin's work. Brilliant stuff. He showed how external factors, the packaging, the color, the shape of a bottle, unconsciously shape how we perceive the product inside.
So people transferred their feelings about the package.
Straight onto the product itself. Whether it was margarine tasting better in foil, or brandy seeming higher quality in a fancy bottle, or even 7-Up tasting more lemony with more yellow in the green packaging.
Wow.
It shows you can't just ask people directly, hey, do you want foil packaging? Because they can't consciously isolate that factor. You need to test things in the actual context where the judgment normally happens.
Which is different from expert food tasters, right? Like Gail Van Civil and Judy Heilman mentioned in the source.
Exactly. They are experts because they've spent years developing a precise vocabulary and a mental structure to describe and analyze their intuitive reactions to flavors, textures, aromas.
So their thin slicing is valuable because they can actually explain the nuances?
Precisely. They've unlocked that door, consciously. Kenna, the musician, was loved by experts who saw him perform live. They got the full context, not by random people hearing a disembodied voice on a phone.
It also explains why those really groundbreaking TV shows like All in the Family or The Mary Tyler Moore Show apparently tested terribly at first.
Yeah, they were so different, so radical for their time, they just shocked people.
And the market research mistook that shock, that unfamiliarity, for dislike.
Right, when really it was just shock. Successful creators and companies understand that initial reactions to something truly new often need careful interpretation, not just taking them at face value.
Okay, finally, we really have to address a critical vulnerability of this rapid cognition, high stress.
Yeah, this is where blink can go terribly tragically wrong.
The devastating example used in the source is the shooting of Amadou Diallo.
Right. The police officers involved were under immense pressure. It was dark, uncertain, fast-moving.
And in that split second, fueled by stress and the context.
Their rapid, intuitive interpretation tragically mistook his wallet for a gun.
Why does stress have such a catastrophic effect on our judgment?
Well, high arousal, intense stress, it severely impairs our rapid cognition. It can lead to what psychologists call mind blindness or even temporary autism.
Mind blindness.
Yeah, your attention narrows drastically, you get tunnel vision, and you lose the ability to process subtle but crucial cues, like reading someone's facial expression.
Paul Ekman's work, right? Stress makes it hard to read faces.
Exactly. Or you missed important information in your peripheral vision, like that study mentioned where the stressed person fixated on a light switch and completely missed the people kissing right next to it.
That really drives home the importance of training before things get critical. That Dade County study on police approaches.
Yeah, that was eye-opening. It showed officers were often really bad at the approach phase, not using cover properly, not coordinating well,
They were basically putting themselves into situations.
where they had no choice but to rely purely on instinct and reflexes under maximum stress, when their judgment was most likely to be compromised.
But improving that initial approach, creating what the source calls white space.
Made a huge difference. It drastically reduced violent incidents.
White space, meaning
Meaning that crucial moment, that little bit of distance, maybe a piece of cover, just something that gives you a fraction of a second more to gather information, to observe, to avoid needing a purely reflexive, potentially mind-blind reaction.
the Diallo incident had zero white space, right? Close quarters, dark, escalated instantly.
Exactly. And you compare that to the description of another highly trained officer in the source who was able to slow down a similar moment, just mentally.
How?
He managed to observe the person's face and the gun simultaneously, extracting maximum information from that thin slice of time before deciding how to act. That's a highly skilled, effective blink, even under pressure, enabled by training and creating that mental space.
It brings us kind of full circle, doesn't it? Back to those classical music blind auditions.
Yeah, it does. Putting up that screen literally created white space.
How so?
It removed the visual distractions, the potential biases, gender, appearance, how someone held their instrument. It forced the judges to focus purely on the sound.
And that allowed for
That small miracle, as the source calls it, where real talent like Abby Conant on trombone or Julie Landsman on French horn could be recognized purely on merit, based solely on what they heard, free from all those interfering preconceived notions.
So wrapping this up then, rapid cognition, our blink, it's clearly this incredibly powerful, really sophisticated tool our brains use all the time.
Absolutely. It lets us make sense of the world quickly, find patterns in crazy complexity, and it frees up our conscious minds to think about bigger things.
It's also fragile, isn't it?
Definitely. It's easily tripped up by biases we don't even know we have, by misleading context, by the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of it.
And it's especially vulnerable under high stress.
Critically so.
So improving your blink, making better snap judgments, it isn't about having some kind of mystical gift.
No, not at all. It's much more about understanding how it works, its strengths and its weaknesses. It's about deliberately creating the right conditions for it to work well.
Like building that structure for spontaneity, finding ways to create white space.
Yeah, and understanding the importance of context, and maybe even being more frugal with the information you focus on.
It's about learning when to trust that gut feeling, and maybe even more importantly, when to pause, take a breath, and question it.
It really is about mastering those first 2 seconds.
So, as you go through your day today, maybe just, take a moment to notice your own rapid judgments. What situations do you find yourself instinctively relying on your blink for?
Hmm.
Are there times maybe where you might be falling for a Warren Harding error, being swayed by something superficial, or perhaps operating with a bit of mind blindness because you're stressed or rushed?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask yourself.
How could you maybe intentionally create a little more white space in your day? Or build better structure for spontaneity in your own decisions, whatever they might be? Just giving that amazing intuitive processor in your head a slightly better chance to gather the right information and serve you more effectively.